Hello and welcome back to our Value Bites. I'm excited to be here with Jack Carney and excited to just talk about vision, valuation, and really planning for 2025. But before we jump in, I wanted to, Jack, thank you for coming and really just toss it over to you for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and what you and your team do over at Trinitas business valuation.
Great, Randy. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. People who know me well have often heard me say, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And they get a confused look on their face the first time they hear that. But in February 2nd, 1973, when many of the listeners were not yet born, my teammates and I finished a morning workout and we went to the dining hall. And so we were chowing down, and one of my teammates brought back a young lady named Dolores O'Brien. And we were both 19 years old and in college. And so this February 2nd, we'll have known each other for 52 years. And also that same time, we'll have been married about 46 and a half years. So we often joke breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And since Dolores's career has been as a registered dietitian and a teacher of dietetics and nutrition, it's also appropriate professionally that breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
I love it.
Yeah, we have two kids, Jennifer and our son-in-law Mike. Have three boys, James, Luke, and Andrew. And our son JD and his lovely wife JJ. They've got a boy and a girl. And everybody lives here in Texas, so we get to see them very, very frequently. I have been a corporate finance guy for a long time. I first joined a subsidiary in the corporate finance department. It was a subsidiary of Shearson Lehman Brothers. And I joke that Shearson and Lehman are two names in the Museum of Investment Banking because they managed to go bankrupt some 20 years ago. But it was great training. I was doing public underwriting work of debt and equity, private placements of debt and equity. We were doing advisory work. We were doing takeovers, takeover defenses, all the good things that you'd expect from a New York-based corporate finance firm at the time. Formed my own firm, actually in partnership with two other gentlemen in 2003. And a little bit over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, we created a brand, and you can see it behind me, Trinitas Business Valuations, because what we were doing is creating a business that focuses first and foremost on business valuations, both a qualitative assessment of a business as well as a quantitative assessment. During the course of my corporate finance business, when we were engaged by a client, we would always do a business valuation, but we would only do it for corporate finance clients. And so now what we're doing is offering a service, both certified and uncertified valuations for clients that may not, in fact, ever become a corporate finance client. And the difference between certified and uncertified is important. Certified, you really only need a certified valuation, at least in my opinion, in litigation and controversy situations. So we get engaged when someone is going to a binding arbitration, they're going to court. And the circumstances where that is most common, well, unfortunately, the most common right now is divorce. But divorce could be shareholder or partner litigation. It could be an IRS contest. It could be probate. And so those are kind of the litigation situations in which we do a certified valuation. That's a fairly extensive process where we might do our valuation, which will take 3 to 4 weeks probably to accomplish if everybody has their information in order. We would submit that. If the opposing side has a valuation, we would spend some time impeaching that valuation. And then, of course, we would be available for expert testimony in the binding arbitration. But the vast majority of valuations we do is what we refer to as a business person's valuation. And it's uncertified, and it's used frequently by clients when they're thinking about engaging in some kind of an activity. It could be selling the company. but it could be also valuing it for estate purposes. We work a lot with financial advisors who are doing a financial plan. The single most valuable asset of the client might be his or her business, and they don't know what it's worth. And so it's kind of hard to put together the financial plan if you don't know what the most valuable asset is worth. So we do uncertified valuations, business versus valuation, very frequently. Do it at a relatively low price point. And we also, in addition to doing the valuation, we will include up to 6 hours of coaching, because in many cases that we certainly want our clients to understand the valuation. Why is it that their company is valued in a certain way? And how can they improve the value using the metrics we provide? And the metrics we provide in the valuation are really financial metrics. And so we'll spend time with them, making sure they understand it. We'll spend time with their accounting staff, and it could be internal, external accounting staff, making sure they're tracking those metrics so that those metrics are in front of them at least on a monthly basis, so that they can continue to monitor their progress towards building a more valuable company. And so that's really how we spend our time. And so we're creating what we hope is a marketing machine where we can generate a lot of valuation transactions without necessarily those being referred to me. Our corporate finance business is very heavily referred, and it's referred to me. We're trying to build a brand that's when people will say, okay, this looks kind of interesting, and we'll do business with Trinitas, not just necessarily business with Jack Carney.
So it's really evident that in the work that you're doing with owners, you not only bring a lot of experience, but you're really coming alongside to kind of provide that wraparound guidance and direction and really help them with the overall knowledge and education. And so, one of my thoughts is, from your experience, how does having a clear vision, whether it's to exit or just kind of in the type of businesses you're working with, how does having a clear vision guide a company's decisions in strategic planning and day-to-day operations from your experience?
Well, we often, use the metaphor of a trip because many of the clients we're working with are on a trip, on a journey to build a more valuable company. And we ask them to make sure they define what a valuable company is, and not that we impose our assessment of what is a more valuable business. I often ask owners, well, how many hours a week do you work in your business, and what are you taking home on an annual basis? And for example, if an entrepreneur is spending 60 hours a week, which is not an unusual time frame for business owners, right. 60 hours a week and bringing home 100,000. I often ask, well, if we can get you to take home 200,000 and only work 40 hours a week, is that, in your judgment, a more valuable company? And of course, the answer is yes.
Right.
And so we want to make sure we're focusing on what their objectives are. But if you're on a journey, if you were to ask me how to get someplace, I would know your end game. But I might not know where you're starting from. I might assume you're in your office in Denton, Texas, but you might not be. You might be in Kansas City and need directions someplace in Kansas City. And so that's part of what we describe when working with business owner. When we start with a qualitative assessment of the business, and we've got some tools and some questionnaires where we do a qualitative assessment, and then the quantitative assessment is actually the business valuation. And that is kind of the starting for the journey. But it's very, very important that they begin to set short-term, medium-term, long-term objectives for the business. And including in, the short-term objectives in getting the business to be for value. We work with them on what happens to your business, what happens to your family if something unfortunate happens to you, a death or disability. And we want to make sure that the owner is building a business that if something sad happens in the short term, that the company, employees, the customers, but particularly their family, are in a better circumstance than they are today. We find, for example, a business owner who sets an end game right? I'm thinking about, I'm going to sell my company or do something with my company in 15 years. That's fine. Okay. It doesn't have to be, I want to sell it in the next 2 to 3 years. A long-term plan is fine as well. But, an owner who sets an end game strategy typically has, interim, short-term goals, midterm goals, obviously the long-term goal. And it's much easier to actually work in that kind of an environment than it is with an owner who really doesn't have an end game strategy, thinking about the business. And I often tell owners that your business is going to transition. In fact, there's a 100% probability that your business is going to transition, and it could be voluntary, and unfortunately, it could be involuntary. I've actually, during the course of my career, I've sold 4 companies for 4 widows, and in none of those cases where the business is really well prepared for the relatively sudden deaths of the founder and owner of the business. So, but 100% of the time, your business is going to transition. It could be transitioned to family members. It could transition to employees. It could transition to employees in the form of an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan. There might be a third-party sale, and the third-party sale, could be, to a strategic buyer, it could be to a private equity firm or some other form of buyer. But there is going to be a transition, and so part of what we try and prepare them to do is we try and prepare them for the eventualities, and we'd like them to have a plan. What's their ideal transition? And in the event that it's not ideal, what are some of the alternatives they can come up with? We tend to be, because my career is corporate finance. I always tell people I suffer from 2 major disabilities. My first is that I began my career as a CPA, and then I transitioned and became a tax lawyer before I became an investment banker. I tend to be very quantitatively oriented. Um, and so when we set up initial sets of metrics for our clients, they tend to be derived primarily from the financial or cost accounting statements of the company. But we strongly encourage them to work, for example, with a firm like yours to set up metrics that are not just or exclusively derived from the financial statements of the company. So there are sales metrics and marketing metrics, there are operational metrics, there are human resource metrics. And so we encourage them to be metric driven, to have a dashboard of the most important metrics of the business. And some of those are going to be marketing, and some of those are going to be human resource metrics, and some of them are going to be, income statement or cost accounting metrics. But we emphasize that extensively. We also, as we're working with the company to build a more valuable business, they will hear me say, probably ad nauseum, you need standard operating procedures.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, the response frequently is, well, no one can do what I do. That's a real challenge for a company that's going to at someday transition if no one else can do what you do. The other response we frequently get is, well, it's easy for me to do it myself, right? And frequently that's true the first time. But the 20th or the 25th or the 30th time you do it yourself, it would have been easier to standardize your procedures, create standard operating procedures, hire, train, and motivate and retain someone who can do that instead of yourself. And most of the small businesses, even the medium-sized businesses we work with, one of the biggest challenges is that the business is too dependent on the owner of the business. So we spend a lot of time not just working on standard operating procedures or metrics, but also working on the owner's perception, how to build a more valuable company.
So obviously, there's a lot of ways that an owner could add more value. And so, you mentioned the power of dashboards and metrics, and also the power of SOPs, those standard operating procedures. As people are looking to plan for 2025 and concentrating on what they can do to maximize their results in 2025, what would you say are some of those other primary areas that they could take advantage of to make sure that they're adding that maximum value?
Sure, that's a great question. We view their 2025 plan as a subset of a longer term plan. Okay. And so right now, they should be setting their budget, or maybe even have completed their budget for 2025. And they might be budgeting not just for the P&L and the balance sheet and the cash flow statement of their company. They might be budgeting items that you're more expert at than I am in terms of business. So once again, when we do the qualitative valuation, we often come up with a number of areas in which they can improve the value of their business. And when we look at a business and look at its growth, if a small business is not growing faster than the marketplace, I think that's a challenge. A small business should be growing at least as fast, preferably faster than the marketplace. If you're a small business and you're growing slower than the market, you're actually losing market share, which is really not a good thing for small business. But again, their growth is not what it should be. There are only a couple of reasons, right? They may be having an operational and execution problem, and we don't pretend to be operation specialists. And so we would introduce them to someone in our trusted advisor network who can help them with whatever their operational challenge might be. And it might be an industrial engineer, it might be, chief operating officer on an fractional basis, might be some other kind of person who can come in and help them operation. The other reason, of course, is a lack of appropriate sales and marketing. And as you know, depending on the size of the business, sometimes sales and marketing are going to work. It's not a differentiated function. In slightly larger business, and a more sophisticated business, they would have a segregated sales function and a segregated marketing function. But if they're not growing, if they're operating on an excellent basis but not growing faster than the market, okay, we would introduce them to someone like you to help them accelerate the growth, do what is most appropriate from a marketing and sales perspective to grow the business faster than the marketplace is growing. Now, I've already mentioned the owner, the dependence on the owner. And that's just a big one with even businesses up in the 10, 20, $30 million range. A lot of times there's an excess of dependence upon the owner, and the owner really needs to have to work through a lot of personal issues. Sometimes it's trust issues. And sometimes, I'm sure in your work, you've worked with organizations that have had a challenge identifying, hiring, training, motivating, retaining salespeople. Okay. And sometimes when you mention to a business owner, well, you need a salesperson, they grimace because they've had a bad experience. But there are methods, there are good standard ways to engage with salespeople. And sometimes, strong business owners have a challenge in doing that. But if you look at other potential dependencies, they may have a dependency on one supplier. They may have a dependency on one employee. They may have a dependency on one customer. And those kinds of dependencies meaningfully, substantially reduce the value of the business. But we've been in the market recently with a company in the construction business. And the number one question we got, we present information, so they already have a lot of it. The number one question they get is, how much of this revenue is recurring? Okay. And a lot of people confuse recurring with reoccurring.
Right.
And so we go through that. Same customer comes back and orders from you or comes into the store and buys something. They are reoccurring customers, not recurring. And so companies that are in both, I would characterize strategic buyers and companies in the private equity business are placing an increasing preference on businesses that have recurring revenue. And so we'll talk about that. But again, the qualitative analysis we do really highlights what are the issues that we need to be focused on with the company, and what are the issues that the owner needs to be focusing on to build the value of his or her business.
So you mentioned earlier, when you're talking about things that you can take action on to improve and increase the valuation of your business, you talked about measuring the success and looking at how to put in place dashboards or systems. So when we're looking at 2025 and how owners and businesses can really establish a means of measuring their value growth in a way that's sustainable, what would you say are some key operational or financial systems or steps that they need to take in order to make sure they can measure that value growth in 2025?
So whatever metrics they decide, and I know that not everything in this world can easily be subjected to a measurement from 0 to 100, right? Rarely do any of us go home to our spouse at the end of the day and say, well, on 0 to 100, how much do you love me today? But even a lot of qualitative things can be measured. Customer surveys, I'm sure you work with your clients on customer surveys, right? And you tend to, based upon the answers, based upon the responses, create a metric of how satisfied customers are with the service or the product that your client is selling. But we start in a lot of cases with the tools that our client has. And it's not surprising that, QuickBooks, NetSuite, the easy version of Dynamics might be the financial and reporting accounting system that they have. In most cases, they're not utilizing it to its full extent. We have worked with companies using QuickBooks, and I said to the owner, you do know that there's actually a budgeting model in QuickBooks. And sometimes they don't know that. If they know it, they haven't been using it. And so we encourage them to take the tools they've already paid, and for no incremental licensing fee, they can take those tools. The financial metrics that I described earlier that we utilize and are actually incorporated in the valuations that we give. We can show them how to use QuickBooks to utilize those. And so the important financial metrics, they see them at least monthly. They track them month over month over month. And so they can look at, hey, my first quarter results in 2025, now are they better sequentially than my fourth quarter? Are they better than prior year's first quarter? So track those financial metrics. In many cases, it's just the changes that need to be made in the business are relatively small to utilize the tools they already have in place.
So it really sounds like a quick win is to start with diving into what you already have and utilizing that to the maximum way possible to have that maximum potential. I think that's a really great way to get that efficiency going and lean into establishing those processes. So that really makes sense. I think it's really clear, Jack, that your experience brings a wealth of diverse knowledge and resources for owners. But as we kind of move into our closing remarks, what would you say is one thing that an owner could do today to maximize the output they want to see in 2025? What's that one thing they could do now?
I would say that's a function really of the organization they have, right? If they're a solopreneur, right, and they don't need to talk to anybody else about what's going on in the business, that would be a different approach. And again, we would go through and analyze, what have you accomplished this year? What do you think you can improve on yourself? If it's an organization that has 10 or 10 employees, that's a little bit more of should be in our judgment, a little bit more of a collaborative process. You probably have people at an organization that size. You probably have someone in sales. You probably have someone in customer service and operations and accounting. and you may be several people deep in a number of these functions. And so the plan you put in place, the quick steps, you can often get by talking to your people, listening to them, telling them what, hey, this is my big idea. How can I help you this year improve the sales performance of this company? And if it's maybe the accounting, how can I help you give me more information, the kind of information that I need? So I would say, because you still have, well, not quite 2 months, but almost 2 months in 2024 before the calendar 2025 begins, is depending on the size of your organization, depending on the depth of the organization, the people you have, you can build a plan. You need to have, I think, a long-term vision, and one hopes it's a happy vision for you, your company, your family, the employees, your customers, and ask them to collaborate with you on how can we improve specific functions. One hopes that if you have a salesperson, that he or she knows more about the sales function than you do. Okay. If not, that could be an independence problem.
Absolutely.
But again, that's what we would suggest is do the planning, and again, based upon the size of the organization, that can vary substantially. But really, just figure out some small steps. You don't have to take any gargantuan steps. There's the old Chinese saying, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step," and that's true of planning what we need to do. What's the most important priorities for 2025? Now that we're in the fourth quarter of 2024.
I think that's such practical action, right? To make sure you have that vision, talk to your people, and look at what those wins are. Those are things that can absolutely take place and really not require so much time and energy and planning to just start and take those baby steps, as you said.
Yeah.
So, if people wanted to connect with you, Jack, and learn more about your work at Trinitas and just dive in a little bit deeper into that knowledge and resource that you can bring to the table, where would be the best place for them to connect with you?
Well, I would suggest two places. One is I've got a fairly prominent profile on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty easy to find. It's Jack Carney, Kearney on LinkedIn. The other, of course, is behind me. Our website, Trinitas Business Valuations.com.
Thank you so much, Jack, for joining us today, for providing a little bit of quick start options for 2025 and how owners can really begin to think about their valuation and maximizing their value over the next couple months, couple years. So really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks a lot. And I hope you and your family have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.